I'd like to tell you the story, if I may, of the most fascinating thing that's happened to me in my entire life. Because of the job that I did as a journalist on television and with national newspapers, I met a fair number of really very, very interesting people. Everything from Mrs. Thatcher to the Dalai Lama. But what happened to me that night in Singapore so many years ago was easily the most interesting thing that had happened to me ever. And I'd just like to tell you about it. Maybe I should, at the beginning, just say a little about myself. I come from Cheshire, north of England. Went to the local grammar school. My father was a factory worker, then a school caretaker. And after grammar school I went up to Oxford and then to America on another scholarship. And came back from there to go on national service in the Air Force. And that's why I was in Singapore, because I asked them to send me to Singapore rather than being sent off to some place like Scunthorpe or Bodmin. And when I got to Singapore, I worked in what was called the education section. You were supposed to be teaching young RAF people various things. And I met a man who was a colleague in the same section, rather strange individual in many ways, came from the same part of Britain as I did, very friendly fellow. He'd been a student leader in Bristol, and he was plainly a religious bird of some kind, which I certainly wasn't. And he was both friendly and said the most irritating things you can imagine. He asked me what I wanted to do when we both went back to Britain, and I said I'd like to work for the Manchester Guardian. So he said, "Oh, so you think personal ambition is a good thing, do you?" Which sounded ridiculous to me, because I'd not said I wanted to be the editor or anything. But it irritated me, as you might imagine. And then on another occasion, he said to me, "I think you're just about the most self-centered person I've ever met." And on that occasion, I'm afraid I threw a bar of soap at him and sadly missed. Anyway, that's who he was, and that's who I was that time, sort of 24 years old. No interest whatever in religion, though I'd been sent off to chapel as a boy by my parents as often as they could get rid of me. If I had a religion, it was certainly cricket. I played just about as much cricket as I could, including quite a lot in Singapore. Anyway, we had a practice, this man, whose name was Jim, of having coffee together in our quarters in the evening after supper. And on this particular occasion we were sitting together, chatting about really nothing in particular. And he suddenly said to me, absolutely out of the blue, "Would you like to listen to God?" I thought, completely thrown. I thought, what a ridiculous question. So I said to him, "But I don't believe in God." So he said very calmly, "That doesn't alter his position in the slightest." To which there was no obvious reply. And he then presented me with a piece of paper and a pencil. And he said, would you think about Jesus? And what do you think about the absolute moral standards which he personified in his life? And he nominated them: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. It's quite a mouthful. And he said to me, why don't you just listen? Write down whatever thoughts come to you in the quiet. I was completely stunned. I didn't expect a single thing. I don't even think I thought how to get out of the place, though I might very reasonably have thought that. And as soon as we sat in quiet, the thoughts started to come into my mind. The first one, which may sound rather banal to you, was, you are a dictator on the cricket field. Apologise to your team. I was the captain of the Air Force cricket team. I had 3 huge Australians in the team. I'd never had that thought before. It was never something that had worried me, but that was a very, very clear thought, and there was no doubt about it. And then the second thought, just as clear: when you went up to Oxford, you became a snob. Write and apologise to your parents. Third thought, there were 3 boys, and their names came to me, who you treated badly at school. Write and apologise to them. Now again, I'd not thought about these things ever before. And the fourth thought had to do with my behaviour towards young ladies, which you don't need much imagination to imagine. Now these thoughts came absolutely out of the blue. I was not worried about these things beforehand, so they were a complete surprise to me. But for whatever reason, I can't tell you why, I just knew that God had been speaking to me. A person who didn't believe in God, but it was clear that there was something which I naturally call God out there who was telling me what to do with my life. And I had a feeling that this God really wanted to run my life. And after we sat in silence for 20 minutes or so, I told him what I thought, he told me what he'd thought. Can't remember what that was actually. And then I left the room. And the extraordinary thing to me, looking back, is that I felt as if I was walking on air. Now, explanations. How come one? If you'd asked me previously what I thought about my life and so on, I'd been quite successful at Oxford and so on. But if you'd asked me what I really felt deep down about my life, I wouldn't have welcomed the question. But I think I would have had to say there was something that was missing. Couldn't have told you what it was. And I had a strange feeling at the end of that evening that I might have found the thing that was missing. Now, of course, the key question is when you've had these clear thoughts which you think came from the Almighty. The key question is what you do about it. And I had no doubt whatever that I had to obey everything that I'd been told. So the first thing I did when the team were together was to say to them quite straightforwardly, the God has said to me that I behave like a dictator on the field, and it's going to stop. I'm going to be different. And I wrote and apologised to my parents, and I wrote and apologised to the 3 boys who I'd treated badly at school. And from that moment on until this very day, over 60 years later, I still spend time in quiet, listening to anything that God may have to say to me, because I have starting from that time on, I have a very profound belief that the Holy Spirit can speak to any of us at any time. And I applied it in every part of the life that I've lived since, when it came to trying to find the right young lady to marry, deciding what career I ought to try and follow. On each occasion, I put the question to God and did what he told me. And very often, what he told me was very clear. For example, just one example, I don't want to bore you to tears. I was sitting in a cinema in North London watching a film called Bridge over the River Kwai when I was waiting to come out of the Air Force. And it was the only time in my life it was actually like a voice. I want you to be a journalist. And it was so like a voice, I actually looked round to see who'd said it. And of course, they were all watching the film. Now, jobs fell off trees in those days, 1950s. And I'd been offered a job as a trainee manager at the BBC. So following the thought, I want you to be a journalist, involved turning down that offer of a job at the BBC. And with something of a struggle, I followed the thought that I'd had, and I went to Scotland to work for a newspaper called The Scotsman as a trainee sub-editor. not a very noble beginning for somebody who had a really quite decent Oxford degree. But the conclusion I come to at the end of it all, starting with that astonishing experience, is that God, from the beginning, knew me far better than I knew myself. And training as a sub-editor led me into a life of writing rather than trying to be a manager. And all I can say is, it works. I hope I've not bored you, Richard, but thank you for listening.